On July 3, 2024, a 58-year-old Chinese man named Cheng Peiming, from Jishi City, Heilongjiang Province, suddenly appeared in Washington, D.C., United States, to tell the world his story. He carried with him a 35.5 centimeters long scar stretching from his back to his left chest. Cheng Peiming is the first person in the world known to have survived a forced live organ harvesting operation with concrete evidence, having escaped the pursuit of Chinese security and agents, who are authorized to shoot to kill upon discovery. After 14 years of hardship, he finally reached the U.S., and following multiple medical examinations, he decided to come forward as a witness. This is an extremely rare case because the nature of live organ harvesting, a state-sanctioned crime in China, is incredibly difficult to prove or disprove. Victims are killed and cremated, leaving no bodies to autopsy. The crimes occur in places like prisons and hospitals, where there are no outsiders, only perpetrators and victims. Once the organs are removed, the operating room returns to looking like any other normal surgical room, leaving no trace of the crime. Medical, prison, and detention records in China are not public, and police often collude with or are themselves the perpetrators. Independent investigative teams are obstructed. This is to say, humanity is facing one of the darkest crimes imaginable, hidden deep in the shadows, and protected and denied by a powerful regime. Cheng Peiming is the first known living witness to have survived forced organ harvesting in China. One could say he returned from the dead to reveal this shocking secret. This video will show us how organ harvesting in China is really carried out, with irrefutable evidence, through the story of Cheng Peiming. No country in the world has such a ready supply of organs. So where do these organs come from? A cornea is worth $30,000, a kidney $60,000, and a heart up to $150,000. Imagine how much a single person could be worth. In short, there is overwhelming evidence that this is truly happening, and it is still continuing. Ladies and gentlemen, this book is called Bloody Harvest. It is an extremely brave and detailed investigation, containing thousands of pieces of evidence regarding the live organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners. It was first published in 2006, nearly 20 years ago. The two authors are David Mattis, a Canadian human rights lawyer and Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and the late David Kilger, former Canadian Secretary of State for Asia-Pacific. 6 million Jews were killed by Hitler during World War II. At the time, people didn't believe Jews were being murdered on such a large scale. Even U.S. Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, who was Jewish himself, once said, "I did not say that he was lying. I said I could not believe him." There is a difference. Referring to reports of the Holocaust. That was also the initial feeling of David Mattis and David Kilger when they first accepted the request to investigate from a group of Falun Gong practitioners. The two men themselves were not practitioners. When we began our work, we had no preconceived conclusion about whether the allegation was true or not. The allegation was so shocking that it was almost unbelievable that we were inclined to find that the allegation was false. That if the allegation were true, it would describe a kind of horror that had never before appeared on this planet. Even if we were to combine all the moral depravity humanity has witnessed in history, the crime was so utterly horrifying that it left us reeling in doubt. But doubt does not mean the allegation is false. Due to the nature and content of this crime, it is extremely difficult to prove or disprove. The best evidence would be direct eyewitnesses, those who had seen it with their own eyes. But with a crime of this nature, such witnesses are incredibly hard to come by, and yet, despite lacking full confessions and full witness testimonies, they were still able to gather a surprisingly large number of confessions through phone investigations. Coalition to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong, CIPFG, has to date published a total of 188 investigative reports, 866 audio recordings as evidence, over 4,000 pieces of documentary evidence, all related to the allegations of live organ harvesting by the Chinese Communist Party. This body of evidence demonstrates that this is a nationally planned genocide campaign launched under a secret directive from former CCP leader Jiang Zemin. Still, the best evidence would be a survivor, an eyewitness who actually lived through the crime. But as David Mattis and David Kilger noted in Bloody Harvest, there were no such survivors, until the appearance of Cheng Peiming in Washington. Perhaps that is why, despite the overwhelming indirect evidence, some people still refuse to accept the existence of this crime, live organ harvesting, perhaps because it is simply too difficult to believe. Some people, not including the perpetrators, do not believe the evidence is real. Others reject it altogether, regardless of the evidence. David Mattis and David Kilger both emphasize that all the sources cited in their reports are verifiable, and anyone who wishes to conduct their own investigation to verify the findings is free to do so. Their conclusion: Falun Gong practitioners, who are completely innocent, have indeed been and are still being killed for their organs, and the numbers are enormous. David Kilger passed away on April 5, 2022, and therefore did not live to witness the emergence of an incredibly rare piece of evidence, a witness who not only saw the crime with his own eyes, but survived it. That is the story of Cheng Peiming, the first known living witness in the world to survive forced organ harvesting and speak out. Cheng Peiming stated that he began practicing Falun Gong in 1998. After the Chinese Communist Party launched its persecution of Falun Gong in July 1999, he was abducted 5 times.
Ông đã
At
bị
the
bắt cóc
end of
5 lần, cuối
2001,
năm
he was
2000.
illegally sentenced to 8 years in prison and was then detained in Dacheng Prison, Heilongjiang Province. In prison, he was frequently tortured. At 8 p.m. on November 16, 2004, the prison authorities forcibly transferred Cheng, who was in good health, to Dacheng 4th Hospital for organ removal. Surgery. The police informed my family that I was in critical condition, and that there was an 80% chance of death during surgery. They asked me to sign the surgery consent form, but I refused. At that moment, 6 police officers held me down and injected me with anesthesia. When I regained consciousness on the 19th, I saw that my right leg was shackled to the hospital bed, one arm was receiving an intravenous drip, both legs had 4 tubes inserted, and there was an oxygen tube in my nose. On November 23, I was escorted back to Dacheng Prison. Then, on December 2, they brought me to the prison clinic to have the surgical stitches removed, and after that, they carried me back to the prison cell on a stretcher. From that point on, I coughed every day, felt pain and numbness in my left ribs, and was unable to stand up. Even now, I still experience dull pain in my left arm and ribs, especially on rainy days or when I'm tired. During the surgery, a prison guard named Zhao was assigned to guard me with a gun. After returning to the prison, he shared that he had heard the head nurse say this was the first time in her 30-year career that she had encountered this kind of transplant surgery. The inmates talked about it for an entire year. They all knew I was the victim of that surgery. By February 2006, Dacheng Prison intensified the torture of Cheng Peiming, pushing him to go on a hunger strike in protest. Then, on March 2, 2006, the prison suddenly transferred him to Longnan Hospital in Dacheng. There, 2 police officers stood watch over him while he was handcuffed to the bedpost on the 5th floor. A doctor came and touched his abdomen and said, "We'll begin treatment tomorrow." That same day, his younger sister came to visit and said the authorities told her he had swallowed a razor blade and required surgery. The chance of death during surgery, they said, was 80%, and she broke down in tears. But Mr. Cheng stated he had not swallowed any razor blade. The claim of 80% chance of death was exactly the same as during the first surgery in 2004. At that moment, I had a terrible feeling, said Cheng Peiming. At 2 a.m. on March 3, he asked to use the bathroom. After returning to the room, the guard forgot to shackle him back to the bed, possibly because he was too sleepy. Cheng quickly escaped from the hospital using the emergency exit. After that, the local police launched a citywide manhunt. With the help of other Falun Gong practitioners, Cheng escaped from Heilongjiang Province. The Chinese Ministry of Public Security issued a Class B arrest warrant, offering a reward of 50,000 yuan. From 2006 to 2016, Chinese authorities at the national, provincial, municipal, and local levels issued a total of 10 different arrest orders against him. 3 years after escaping, Cheng met a friend in Dacheng who said he knew someone in the city police department. That officer had confirmed that anyone who spotted Cheng Peiming had permission to shoot him on sight, and could later claim the reward after providing proof. In March 2006, after reading a report on the Minghui website about live organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners, Cheng was horrified. He said, "When I thought about my experience in the hospital, I trembled all over. For 2 months after that, I always wore long clothes to bed. I finally understood the implications of that transplant surgery I underwent at Dacheng Hospital in 2004. By 2015, Cheng managed to escape to Thailand, where he was later rescued by the US government. He finally arrived safely in the United States in 2020. After several medical examinations, it was confirmed that the left portion of Mr. Cheng's liver makes up only about 1/3 of a full liver, and half of the lower lobe of his left lung has been removed. This raises 7 major questions surrounding the story of Cheng. Some of you may still have doubts, such as, how could Cheng Peiming have survived a live organ harvesting surgery? Why wasn't Mr. Cheng Peiming silenced or killed to cover up the truth? What about the medical questions surrounding the position and length of his surgical scar? We invite you to follow the analysis by Dr. Tang Jingyuan, a senior physician and respected independent current affairs commentator. Hopefully, his explanations will help clarify some of the reasonable doubts people may have. Question 1. what evidence does Mr. Cheng Peiming have to prove that his organs were surgically removed, and which organs were taken from his body? Dr. Tang Jinyuan explains, after attending the press conference yesterday, I obtained several documents. When Mr. Cheng Peiming arrived in the United States, it was during the outbreak of the Wuhan pneumonia epidemic, and many things were not going smoothly. Some kind-hearted individuals in the U.S. assisted him during these 4 years. During that time, Mr. Cheng underwent 9 medical examinations, 3 enhanced CT scans, 3 ultrasound exams, 2 X-rays, 1 MRI scan. These 9 examinations were primarily conducted at the Jefferson Medical Imaging Center in New Jersey, a relatively authoritative institution. The final reports from these exams confirmed that the left lobe of his liver had been surgically removed, specifically the second and third segments, making up nearly 1/3 of his liver. Additionally, half of the lower lobe of his left lung had also been removed. Secondly, the medical images show a very clean and flat cut where the tissue is missing. There is no doubt that this was not caused by trauma or natural loss but rather by a surgical procedure using a very sharp scalpel. The cut surface is extremely smooth, and visible scar tissue has clearly formed. This constitutes fairly strong evidence that in the 3 years since Mr. Cheng Peiming arrived in the U.S., 10 medical experts have analyzed his test results. One of them is a pioneer in partial liver transplantation and a specialist in hepatobiliary surgery. Their assessments were unanimous. Mr. Cheng's left liver and part of his left lung had been surgically removed with a scalpel. Question 2. Why is Mr. Cheng Peiming still alive after losing 1/3 of his liver? Why was only 1/3 taken for transplantation, and is such a transplant effective? Dr. Tang Jinyuan explains, this question involves a key piece of medical knowledge. The liver is the most regenerative organ in the human body. Even if 1/3 or more of the liver is removed, it can regenerate within 6 to 9 months, growing back to approximately 90% of its original size, in some cases, even fully. Currently, medical exams show that Mr. Cheng's remaining liver has undergone compensatory hypertrophy, particularly in the fourth segment of the left lobe and the right lobe. This means that the remaining parts have started to regenerate after part of the liver was removed. However, this regeneration does not mean the removed portion grows back. Instead, the parts that were not cut grow larger to compensate. As a result, the proportion of Mr. Cheng's liver lobes is now very abnormal. In healthy Asian males, the normal ratio between the left and right lobes is roughly 45 to 55. But for Mr. Cheng, the ratio is 27 to 73, indicating a significant imbalance caused by the removal of a portion of the left lobe, followed by regeneration of the right lobe. This is the second piece of strong evidence. As for the effectiveness of transplanting only 1/3 of a liver, Dr. Duong Tin Vien says that based on assessments by qualified liver transplant specialists, this type of procedure is very suitable for pediatric liver transplants, meaning the extracted liver portion could feasibly be used in a child recipient. In other words, the recipient of the 1/3 of Mr. Cheng Peiming's liver was very likely a child, so the liver portion required was relatively small. Question 3. Could it be that Mr. Cheng Peiming's organs were removed due to some illness? After all, many people undergo liver surgery. Dr. Tang Jinyuan explained that medical examinations conducted so far have ruled out the possibility that Mr. Cheng suffered from cirrhosis, chronic hepatitis, liver nodules, or parasitic infections. In short, his liver was completely healthy. Moreover, his liver function test results are still normal today, which proves that a portion of Mr. Cheng's liver was removed while it was in a perfectly healthy state. Question 4. How can the timing of the organ harvesting be confirmed, especially since it happened 20 years ago? Modern medical imaging cannot precisely determine the timing of the surgery. Mr. Cheng also cannot retrieve his medical records. So how can it be determined that the surgery took place in November 2004? Dr. Tang Jinyuan pointed out that there is concrete evidence, a foreign website called minghui.org. By chance, he discovered that ever since the persecution of Falun Gong began, minghui.org has focused on reporting news about the repression of Falun Gong practitioners inside mainland China.
This persecution is ongoing. On November 19, 2004, Minghui.org published a report specifically naming Cheng Peiming as a victim of mistreatment. The report stated that he had swallowed nails in protest against the persecution and was taken to the hospital for surgery at 4 p.m. on November 17, 2004. The report also included post-surgery photographs taken at the time. The article did not mention organ harvesting, likely because at that time, the authors and photographers were unaware of what had been done. Now, in retrospect, the report can actually serve as a de facto medical record,
confirming that Mr. Cheng underwent surgery on November 17, 2004. During the press conference, Mr. Cheng removed his shirt in front of everyone to show a clear surgical scar measuring 35.5 centimeters, the only such scar on his body, indicating that he only underwent one major surgery. Therefore, based on the Minghui report and current medical imaging, it can be reasonably determined that Mr. Cheng underwent surgery while imprisoned, during which part of his liver and left lung were removed. This constitutes a fully documented case of organ harvesting from a living person. Question 5. Was the surgery perhaps only to remove the nail he had swallowed, rather than to harvest organs? Dr. Tang explained. The Minghui article did state that Mr. Cheng had swallowed a nail in protest. The Dacheng prison used this as a pretext to send him to the hospital. However, there was one particularly surprising detail in the press conference. Among the 9 medical examinations Mr. Cheng has undergone in the U.S., all of them have consistently shown no surgical trace on his digestive tract or esophagus. In other words, there is no evidence that any procedure was performed to remove the nail from his stomach. The only plausible explanation is this: after being anesthetized, the Dacheng hospital should have used endoscopy to remove the nail through the esophagus. This technique is not difficult. In fact, according to the official website of Dacheng People's Hospital No. 4, where Mr. Cheng's surgery was performed, the hospital had already mastered this endoscopy technique since the 1990s. Question 6. Since the liver is on the right side of the abdomen, why is Mr. Cheng's surgical scar on the left side? Dr. Tang explained, the scar on Mr. Cheng's body is very long, 35.5 centimeters. X-ray images also show that a portion of his ribs was cut. Experts speculate that the reason the incision was made from the left side of the chest is to access more internal organs. With such a long incision, almost the entire chest and abdominal cavity could be opened. Medical imaging also shows that a portion of Mr. Cheng's diaphragm, the muscle that separates the chest and abdomen, was cut away. This indicates the surgical process was as follows: first, the chest cavity was opened, then, part of the left lung was removed, followed by cutting the diaphragm, and finally, a portion of the left liver was removed through the diaphragm and into the abdominal cavity. This is how the entire surgery was performed. Question 7. Why wasn't Mr. Cheng Peiming killed afterward to silence him? Dr. Tang Jingyuan believes that there are 2 major factors explaining why Mr. Cheng was able to survive. The recipient was likely a minor, so only a small portion of Mr. Cheng's liver and lung needed to be removed. The doctors who harvested his organs might have thought that the removed portions were small enough that his body could regenerate, allowing them to harvest again later, treating him like a renewable resource, like a patch of chives that can be cut and regrown. At the time, Mr. Cheng was still serving a prison sentence, so the doctors and prison officials might have assumed he would never escape or expose the crime. Indeed, after his first organ harvesting, Mr. Cheng was returned to prison. Then, about a year and a half later, in March 2006, he was taken to the hospital again, possibly for another, final round of organ removal and subsequent execution. However, the second factor that saved his life was unexpected luck. When he was taken to Longnan Dacheng Hospital for this second surgery, the guards fell asleep, and the emergency exits were not locked. Mr. Cheng miraculously escaped through a fire exit and survived. Dr. Tang concluded, as a medical professional, after thoroughly reviewing the relevant evidence, he firmly believes that Cheng Peiming is the first person in the world to survive live organ harvesting with verifiable, documented proof, and he has bravely stepped forward to expose these crimes to the world. It is truly rare. In a certain sense, Dr. Tang said, in the darkness, there is heaven's will. What man is doing, heaven is watching. Dear audience, on June 25, 2024, exactly 1 week before Mr. Cheng Peiming appeared to testify in Washington, the U.S. House of Representatives unanimously passed the Falun Gong Protection Act. This marks a significant turning point that scholars have called justice delayed. The Falun Gong Protection Act breaks the 25-year silence that the Chinese regime has maintained through bribery and threats across the globe. The act calls for the United States to help end the forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners and other prisoners of conscience backed by the Chinese state. It also demands sanctions on individuals in China who participate in or assist with organ harvesting activities. Regarding the passage of the Falun Gong Protection Act in the House, lawyer David Mattis told the Epoch Times that the core of this law is about stopping the live organ harvesting. We often hear about concerns regarding Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan, or the Uyghurs, but nothing is ever said about Falun Gong, yet the persecution of Falun Gong exceeds all these other groups in terms of number of victims, brutality, and its significance to the Chinese Communist Party. There is no reason why such a criminal regime should be allowed to rule over China. Given the gravity of the crime of live organ harvesting, this atrocity has still not received the attention it deserves, and if it is still happening out there, then, dear viewers, what should we do? Or if we can do nothing, then what should we think? For those who believe, a single kind thought in our hearts may be enough to move heaven itself.